Welcome. I'm Andy Carlson, and you're listening to the Time with Tim podcast. Each episode, we explore the impact of complex trauma through the personal journeys of our guests. Along the way, we'll connect with experts and individuals who share their unique perspectives, insights, and practical tools to help you on your healing journey. Let's take this time to learn together. Welcome back, everyone. In our last episode with Tim Fletcher, we began exploring the man behind the message, his personal journey, and his insights into complex trauma. It was a powerful conversation, and today we're continuing where we left off. There were a few things we didn't get to touch on last time, and I'm excited to ask more questions about Tim's background, worldview, and the philosophy behind his work. So let's dive in, if you're ready, Tim.
I am. Let's go.
All right. So I thought that we'd start on a light note, and I was wondering if you could just tell me maybe about a recent vacation experience that you found pleasurable or enjoyable.
So Kim and I, what I realized after I burned out and had all my health issues is really kind of two things. Number one is I need an extended break every year to kind of rejuvenate. So I just need an extended vacation, and I needed a break from the cold of Canada. So we started trying to plan vacations into warmer climate in the winter months. So we just got back from the island of St. Martin in the Caribbean. We were there for 5 weeks, and it was a wonderful experience. What I find was fascinating to me, and Kim got a big kick out of it, is when I get away from the kind of the pressure and I've continued my own personal growth, is I get vacationing, I just want to explore. But this time I was saying hi to everybody. I was chatting to the locals. We found one place where we rented our little umbrella and beach chairs and sat on the beach, and we just went to the same place every time and got to know the staff. And so all of a sudden, it's almost like this extreme introvert is acting like an extrovert. And then the second thing is, so I've never liked water. I don't float. I sink. I've just always hated water, whereas Kim has been a fish. And she grew up around water, in water, and loves water. So being on the ocean, I just thought, what can I do? And so I said, let's go to the beach. And then I bought myself a little child's inner tube. And I just floated around in the ocean, and Kim would swim around and I would just float. And I'm sure I looked like a total nerd, but it was actually really, really enjoyed it. And so it's just, I think for me, it's realizing ongoing growth is still happening inside of me. And that just adds even more pleasure and meaning to our times away and holidays.
Floating in the ocean sounds amazing right now. When you mentioned the inner tube, are you on top of it or in it? Was it around you, or were you on top of it?
It was around me.
It was around you. Okay, so you were inside this kid's
so I had to step into it and pull it up, and my arms are above it, and I'm floating around.
I love that picture, that image that it brings up. And I want to ask too. You mentioned kind of moving from being much more of an extreme introvert to an extrovert. What can you talk about like maybe any sort of like mental or emotional shift that you noticed that helps bring about that change, or was it just that you're outside of your normal environment?
Yeah, good question. So I think to me, early in life, I always extreme introvert. My parents accepted that. I was a thinker. I liked to be in my room, writing, reading. But I realized in my teens that if I was going to kind of mature into a full life, I needed to learn some social skills. I needed to learn how to interact with others. And so I began to really work at being more sociable, even though wasn't an extrovert, but I got better at acting like an extrovert, I guess, and just being able to dialogue with people. It still wasn't my comfort zone, but I could do it. When I became a pastor, you kind of had to do that. And then in my job, you're constantly working with people. But what I've loved about my job is I can talk with people kind of like an introvert likes, at a deep level, very personal. It's not just chit chat about the weather and stuff like that. And so it's always been very focused, very deep, and I just have loved that. But I think what I would say in answer to your question is, what I've seen is I was extreme introvert, but there was always a shame element that came out of my upbringing where I wasn't super comfortable with myself. And being an introvert, it was realizing I didn't naturally connect with a lot of people because they didn't talk deep. They didn't think deep. They were just fun people. And so that actually fed the shame a little bit, that I'm weird, I'm a bit different, and not as comfortable in a social setting, because I realized that. And I think part of what the healing growth journey for me has just become increasingly comfortable. I've always accepted that I'm an introvert, but just being comfortable with who I am. And so when I'm with people, it's not so much on guard. It's just, hi, how are you? And if it goes nowhere, fine. If it's a little bit of chit chat, fine. Just being comfortable with that. So I think it's some of that gradual healing of shame that has contributed to being more comfortable just being out there a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate your answer on that. This is an area, it resonates with me because I've always been pretty heavily introverted. But I've always explained myself that I'm an extrovert trapped in an introvert's body. And as I've found, like in my own healing from complex trauma and kind of building some of the social skills and healing from that shame, there's been this dramatic change, like the discomfort from being around people and kind of some of the negative views that I had about people, just changing that. Allows a lot greater opportunity for connection. You started going here a little bit, and so I'd love to begin, and I hope to begin these with a little bit of a vulnerability check-in. And you've mentioned about still things that you need to process and work on. And so I was hoping that you'd be willing to share a recent vulnerability or something that you're currently working on.
I think part of my upbringing, which was very, very healthy, was mom and dad provided for us a very safe environment, but a very structured environment. So every day similar routine. There was always some flexibility, but it was fairly predictable, and so being an introvert, I love that. I gravitated to it because it was kind of natural boundaries that were set for me that I just fit into. They suited me. And so when it was, there's time as a family, but then you could go off and do your own thing. And I love that. And so I go do my thing and all of those boundaries. But then I created kind of my own structure on top of the existing structure. And I liked my own structure. I liked my own routine. What I found once I got married and had kids was I didn't like it when that nice little routine got interrupted. and I had to learn that, okay, loving people is being routine but flexibility. And that was important. What I found, though, was the kids have all left the nest. Kim and I are on our own. We have our own routine again. It's very structured again. So we're in the process of the girls are selling their house, and so whenever there's a showing, they have to come over here just because they can't be at the house. So all of a sudden, my evening's getting interrupted and it's like, okay, I'm not liking this. I like my evening structure. It's pretty, every day it's the same kind of thing, and it's very enjoyable for me, but now that's getting interrupted. And it's really realizing, okay, you can be flexible. This is important. This is necessary. This is what love is all about. So you can give up your routine for a bit and just be there for your girl. So it's like I've learned it, but I got to relearn it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to me part of recovery is you learn it, but then you got to relearn it at a different level.
Yeah. What one of the areas, we talk about boundaries a lot, and so there's our internal values, kind of the morals that we choose to live by. Those are a type of boundary. There's another boundary of just kind of like how I'll let you treat me, and then I see there's one that's kind of in between the two. That's this internal, like, but interrelational boundary. And so, when other people are in our life, how much of our attention is focused on them versus on us, and how well we can adapt to that. Can you chat a little bit about how that appears for you, and maybe kind of like how this, with this routine and flexibility, how that shows up as well?
Yeah. So if I can back up and kind of come at it from a bigger picture, one of the things that, as I look back when I was younger, so I loved boundaries, and thankfully my parents, the boundaries made sense. The boundaries I could see were for my good. They weren't just about mom and dad's life being easier and not fair to the kids. It was about what was best for the kids, for them to be healthy and safe. And so I really valued boundaries. But then part of what I began to get with some of my Christian upbringing was there were lots of rules, and many of them fit with the boundaries that I was growing up with and made sense, but some of them didn't make sense. And so so a rule is a boundary, but I needed to make sense. And what it had to do to make sense was I could see that it was good for me. I could see that it was about how to love people and that I'm just as important as you are. My needs matter just as important as yours. And so it was beginning to be able to kind of nuance boundaries to not just a rule, but a rule that makes sense and is in line with love and that everybody's equal. So that was an important growth development for me. But then part of, I think, my personality really liked black and white. It just liked, here's a boundary, let's just stick with it. This is always going to be the same in every single situation. But then I got married and had kids, and it's like, okay, I got to nuance this quite a bit here. This boundary. So some nights we can say bedtime is 8:30, but other nights, okay, 8:45. Like the boundary is going to constantly shift, but you're still aiming at kind of a general guideline, but you're building in a flexibility based on the needs of that moment. And then it was a second boundary was I was learning I had to do self-care if I wasn't going to burn out again. But then all of a sudden, some days I'm doing good self-care, and then one of my kids is sick, or one of my kids has a really important event at school, and Dad, can you come and watch it? And oh, that interrupts with my self-care. So whose needs matter more, your needs or my needs? And it's like, okay, overall, I want a balance that I sacrifice sometimes, you sacrifice sometimes. Overall, it's about 50-50. But there's going to be times I have to sacrifice. I can't just say, nope, my boundary is good self-care. Screw you. I don't care about your needs. That's not love. That becomes a very narcissistic thing. And so it's really realizing that boundaries is not just a black and white concept. It has to be brought into relationships that have variations and changes in needs that then require flexibility, adjustments, but yet an overall picture of what we're aiming at.
Yeah. Okay. I get what I hear you say is it's important to have kind of like some rules and guidelines, but that all of these rules and guidelines have these adjustments, available adjustments for love, relationship, and balance that's created out of a kind of a bigger picture
Right.
perspective.
So if I could just add one qualifier to that, because I've taught this to many clients and they go, and they're in a narcissistic relationship and they go back and they go, okay, so Tim said because of the situation right now, I have to put my needs aside and they actually feed into codependency. They feed into it. And it's like, no, I'm not teaching that. I'm teaching that if the overall has to be 50-50, you're sacrificing just as much as them. If they're not sacrificing at all and you're the only one sacrificing, that is not healthy. And don't try to make it healthy by twisting what I'm saying. But what I'm saying, in a committed relationship where both people are wanting to be healthy, both are working at kind of overall 50-50 give and take, but some days it's 60-40, some days it's 70-30, because needs and all of that is constantly changing, but overall it balances out to about 50-50.
This is an area that we jumped over in our last discussion, was just kind of your university years. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about what you studied, what life was like, who was Tim during those years?
So after like I told you, I had this very clear sense in my 12, 13, I wanted to become a pastor. That's how I interpreted it at that point. And so I looked into, I thought I could just kind of go through high school and move into becoming a pastor and maybe go to seminary or something like that. And every seminary required that you have a university degree. And I didn't want to go to university because I just wanted to become a pastor. And when I was actually, if I can back up, when I was 15, I said to my dad one day, Dad, I just have such a strong desire to serve. What's the point of me going to high school? Like, this is boring information I'm learning. Why can't I just quit high school and get into this right now? And my dad thankfully said, son, in high school, you're not just learning educational academic facts. You're learning how to relate to people. You're learning about life. You're maturing gradually through all of the experiences of high school. That's a key part of your learning growth. It's beyond academic. So I stuck through high school, but I was still antsy to get moving on to my career, my vocation. But I had to go through high school, through university. And so it was, I don't want to go through university. What am I good at? Well, I did very, very well in math. So, okay, I'm going to find a place where I can get a math degree and bomb through university, and then I can go on to seminary and become a pastor. But what I did at university basically was I did all my math courses and kind of there was a few prerequisite courses I had to take to get into seminary, philosophy and ancient histories and all of that. So I did all of those courses, and so that would take me kind of 4 to 8 hours a day of study. But then I would spend 4 to 8 hours a day doing self-study courses to prepare for seminary. And so I just really, it wasn't so much I consciously, rigidly tried to divide my university time to match how much I would then spend self-study courses, but it kind of worked out. I spent about the same amount of time. And so my goal in university wasn't a social life. It wasn't to party. It wasn't to get to know people or women. It was, I'm here to get my math degree and prepare for seminary with self-study. So I taught myself Greek during that time. All of that was part of that. So I was just, again, this very focused. University wasn't for me what it was for most people. I just went there to do what I had to do to get ready for being a pastor.
Yeah. I didn't realize we have some parallels. It's different, but I was a math major as well in undergrad. And I wasn't preparing for seminary, but I used to work on and lead these 3-day retreats, maybe every other weekend. And so every moment I wasn't studying for for school, I was out working on and leading these retreats. So I understand that after you graduated, you had a technical job or a technical career for a while as well. Could you tell us about
Yeah,
that?
so like I told you last time, my parents purposely lived poor, and so they said we can. So I came home every weekend. The university was about an hour away from my parents, and I was still quite involved in the church. So I came home every weekend to be involved in different activities. So they said, we'll load you up with food every Sunday night and send you back, but we
Hmm.
can't pay your tuition. So the university that I went to was offering a co-op program. So you went to school 4 months, then they got you worked in your field in a company approved by the university for 4 months, and then that paid for your next tuition. So I got into the co-op program, and I worked for General Motors. So they started me. Part of my it was a math degree with a business minor. So they first were looking at getting me into kind of the business end, and so I was in Oshawa, Ontario, and they had me doing different kind of office management jobs, which I really really liked. But then they moved me to Windsor to do computer programming, and I loved that. And then when I graduated, they hired me in Windsor as a computer programmer. So again, it wasn't kind of how I thought it was going to work out, but it's how it did work out, and yeah, I'm very grateful for it.
I think that actually gives me a lot better kind of understanding when you give your talks. Your talks are presented in this very orderly, clear to understand progression, and so I can see that technical background,
Computer program.
just like showing, yeah,
If
showing
this,
through
then
as you,
this, then
you
this.
know, yep, yeah. So I was wondering, this is a little bit of a detour since you're really good at explaining concepts in a way so that they're accessible. There's there's one type of therapy that it's internal family system or parts work. And that's the one that I've found from people that often when they first hear of it, if you're a smart, logical, rational, analytical human being, you're just like, this is loosey goosey, this is frou frou. Could how could you explain like parts work or IFS to someone who would maybe be resistant to it because of that analytical mind?
Yeah, so let me again back up and lead into it this way. What I realized is I had a naturally very analytical mind. I just analyzed everything. I wanted to understand why everything, why did this happen, if you did that, all of that. And what I didn't realize though is my shame took my naturally analytical mind and it took it to a bit of a self-protective place
Mm.
where I just wanted everything to be academic. I wanted everything to be able to just to be figured out in the mind, minus any emotion, minus any experience with interacting with people, because that took me out of my comfort zone. I was not comfortable there, wasn't good there, but let me be in my mind all day figuring stuff out, and I'm happy. And so part of when I first heard about internal family systems and inner child work, it was, yeah, psh. But looking back on it, it's because it would take me out of my mind into emotions, into
Mm.
connecting to parts of me that made me uncomfortable and then having to interact with others usually about that. No, I wanted to do everything independently, so solo work and just use my mind. That was a very unhealthy kind of focus that came out of that, plus Western culture that we should be able to do everything on our own and everything's just got an academic solution. So, but what it did was help me realize, okay, there's others like me that once I began to see the value of internal family systems and inner child stuff, I need to help them take away, got to take away the language that just automatically makes them resistant. And so for me, it was really beginning to realize, yeah, there were parts of me that I would consider stunted, that for some reason, fear kept me from stepping out of a certain comfort zone. It kept me, there's a fear that I would get hurt, I would get made fun of. My shame was driving it. Something was trying to protect me from getting hurt again. So if I could explain all of that rationally, and people go, yeah, I get that. That's me. I go, well, that's internal families.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different systems, and I just say there's systems in your brain that are designed to keep you protected from ever getting hurt again. So some people can say, okay, here's this one system that I use. Okay, I get angry. Okay, well, let's just make that apart. Here's another system that I use. I analyze everything to death. Okay, let's just make that apart. So I go, I'm not trying to put something on you that is just weird. I'm just explaining what's going on in your brain. And then some people just attach part names to that because it helps them. That's all this is. So that's helped a lot of people. But what I've found in doing that is there's still many hyper analytical people that are just the walking brain as the result of their complex trauma, that to step from there to their heart and emotion level is just way too scary. They just cannot do it. And so parts work or internal family systems to them is just, can't do it. Weird, don't connect, don't relate. And it's not that they can't relate. It's they think the way to relate is they got to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And the way to relate is you got to actually experience moving there. And they're afraid to do that.
Yeah, so you're focusing. That's something I don't think I'd totally realized was kind of that, that analytical part is often there's a protection to it as well to keep you from there. And so it's just doing what it does by expressing a rejection or a fear of this. And I think you touched on kind of in your own story, one of the benefits that I see of it is that often sometimes like these parts in a healthy mind are like they have this natural tool set or this natural skill set. And so, whether you're maybe a compulsive OCD orderly, that healing the trauma, you still have this aesthetic sense.
Yes.
That you have this like sense for beauty, and then, but like in the complex trauma brain, it just occurs more as this OCD and orderliness. And you mentioned for yourself was kind of that analytical, but an emotionalist part. And so we can still have that orderly brain, understanding complex systems and logic, but from a more connected.
Yeah, so two things with that. I think it's always important for the analytical people to realize is I'm not asking you to give up the analytical mind. I'm not asking you to disparage it. That's super important. That's super valuable. You're always going to want that and use it. I'm asking you to expand beyond just your mind, to experience other parts of you that maybe you've been avoiding. But there's a second piece with what you said. So a lot of the parts actually are some of our natural gifts and talents and strengths, our proclivities. So I remember as a kid, so my dad as a pastor, they would entertain a lot. And so when we had people over, I was quite comfortable because I picked up on mom and dad's that they were relaxed, so I was relaxed. But my dad would be the one kind of in the living room visiting, etc. Mom would be in the kitchen getting coffee and dainties and all of that and puttering around and serving, etc. But I always picked up a little bit of my mom's antsiness. She was a bit anxious. Now, I didn't know it at the time. That was just my vagus nerve was picking that up.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I realized a number of years ago is whenever were in a social setting, if I started to feel any anxiety, I'd want to get up and do something. I want to go in the kitchen and I need to organize something. I need to fix something. And it was like, okay, I've picked up from my mom that if I have anxiety, I need to get busy doing something, so I don't have to sit and be present. So it was actually a type of dissociation. I don't want to be in the present. I want to be somewhere busy doing something. And so it was built off a strength that I'm a very organized person. I love all of kind of getting stuff organized. And so that was my go-to as soon as I needed to protect myself.
That's interesting. Is that something that you came to realize more after the fact on your own healing journey, or is that something that you were
Yeah.
aware, like,
I was not aware of that until
mm-hmm,
after I really started in this field and began to understand complex trauma. And then I began to spot, like, your self awareness just keeps gradually
mm-hmm,
growing as you gain more knowledge. And I began to notice this in myself. And I think it hit me. I can't even remember the exact day or the event, but it was a social setting. And I just realized there was something that was feeling a bit uncomfortable. And all of a sudden I had this impulse. I needed to get up and do something. And I just wanted to be anywhere but sitting in that chair. I wanted to
mm-hmm.
be active. I had a bunch of energy right now that needed to be vented. And then it was, whoa, what's this all about? And then it started clicking.
Yeah, it's amazing when you can bring your awareness to something. Uh, this is one of my go-tos is like we always have this saying of does a fish know it's swimming in water? And complex trauma and shame are the water that we swim through in our culture that we just we're usually not aware of and we can't see, and it's like such a benefit to be able to go through it, and then when you can see it, when you're aware of it, just to see who you are and how you interact in a situation. Um, going back to kind of like your own healing journey, how there's a way that you describe like your complex trauma, where you were kind of like you had a lot of you were down, you were depressed, you had a lot of difficulty. Could you maybe kind of touch on maybe like some of the physical, emotional, relational, spiritual components of kind of while you were experiencing it, and then maybe some of the steps and the resources that you began to use as you were kind of rebuilding your life and coming out or healing or integrating.
Sure. I think big picture would be I pushed myself until I was physically and emotionally burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
And the body basically said, we're going on strike. We're not cooperating with your pushing us agenda anymore. We can't take it. And so there was really kind of an internal collapse, implosion that was physical and emotional. So as soon as I gave myself permission to stop pushing myself, it's like it made all the symptoms worse because I was giving my body permission now to relax. I was giving my body permission to not have cortisol pumping. And so I had just daily physical pain. I was often nauseous, just fluish feeling that was just felt yucky. I was constantly just tired, zero motivation to do anything. Even if I did stuff that I used to like doing, didn't give me any joy. All the things that used to, I kind of my routine that fed my soul So reading my Bible, praying, going to church, those did nothing for me. It's like my prayers bounced off the ceiling, read the Bible like sawdust, just nothing. Go to church, hated it, couldn't get out of there fast enough, did nothing for me. So it was like, this is in a dark, dark place. And then just to the point where I wanted to connect, but I didn't want to connect. That was the higher, more powerful thing, is if people wanted to connect with me, I just wanted to run away. I just wanted to put boundaries up. Like, no, I'm not available to connect. I don't have energy to connect. You don't want to connect with me. And so it was really pushing myself further and further internally into isolation, where I just didn't want to connect with anybody. And even a time with the kids and Kim where it was, I forced myself to connect a little, but it was forcing myself. It was not something that I wanted to do. And I think they sense that, and that a lot of their trauma comes from that. But so as I went more and more into this world that was isolated, it got deep, deep depression, zero motivation, all of that. That then, when I tried to go out into a social setting, I just spent the last week in this very internal, isolated world. Now I had huge anxiety issues that were beginning to develop. And it's like, I'm not used to being here. I don't know what to do here. I don't want to be here. And so that became a new thing for me, was this anxiety. Now, I'd always had low-grade anxiety that I wasn't even realized. As a kid, as an introvert with shame issues, there'd always been anxiety, but I'd never even twigged into them when I was younger. But now it was loud and clear for me. And then I had suicidal ideation. I had just like losing hope because everything the doctors were trying, nothing was working. They didn't know what to do. Everything I was trying wasn't working. And it was just this kind of getting ground down to, what's the point? I'm no good to anybody. I'm hurting my kids. I'm hurting Kim. But it was always, thankfully, but I knew that the damage it would do to my kids and Kim if I did that, I just couldn't do it. But the thoughts were part of that. So, and then it was, I thankfully never got into kind of more extreme types of escape. Like, I didn't get into any bizarre sexual, drugs, any of that kind of stuff, just wanting to escape everything. I had enough growth to be able to say, no, I have to stay kind of within a certain moral framework that's healthy, or else I'm going to really do damage. So it didn't mean I wasn't tempted at times. It just, thankfully, I had that kind of core structure that kept me somewhat safe from myself, I guess is the way to say it. So yeah, that, I don't know if that's answering your question, but that was kind of the symptoms. So it was just like, felt spiritually dead, felt emotionally dead, physically tired and pain, constantly, just felt crappy. There wasn't one positive emotion really happening in life. It was just layers of pain in all different aspects of life. So that was going on, and I was retreating more and more into self-protective mode, into freeze, into flight, avoid, numb, don't want to feel, it's too painful. And that was isolation. So it was taking me to deeper, darker places. So what looked like it was helping by isolating and avoiding everything was actually feeding into making it worse. So there's zero information available at that time on complex trauma. There was zero tools available as far as polyvagal, as far as somatic. It was just like, this was not even a field. at that point. So what I did notice was I had one friend who refused to kind of let me push him off. So about once a month, he'd just call me and say, Tim, I really want to take you for a coffee. Can we just go for a short coffee? And what I noticed was that being able to just talk to somebody at a heart level helped. And then I would sit on the couch and I'd watch some of my favorite music. And at times I would just feel this emotional lift. I would feel some positive emotions. So I was slowly beginning to piece out by trial and error. This helps, this doesn't help. This makes things better, this doesn't. And learn tools that feed my soul that I didn't have earlier. So eventually I'd been put on some medications. So they said, you need to go to a psychiatrist just to make sure that this medication. So I went to a psychiatrist, and he was a really good guy. And he said, Tim, would be all right if you just come once a week and we'll talk for a while. And so he talked, and I got extremely frustrated with that, because it was at that point, the whole mindset in psychotherapy or counseling was you let the person talk and you don't give any kind of input. So I would just talk for an hour and he'd go, okay, thank you. And I go, like, aren't you going to give me something to go on here? Oh, no, that was good. And so I did it for about 6 months. I just forced myself to go and keep talking because I knew it was helping me a bit just to talk and process. But I was very frustrated with the approach that the psychiatrist was taking. And so that actually was quite helpful for me in a sense. Then once my disability ran out and I had to get a job, so I worked on all these farms, which we talked about. What I began to realize was being in nature, being with animals, working physically in mild physical labor, I could feel something was shifting inside, something was healing inside, something positive was happening. And so it was like, oh, here's some new tools. Here's some stuff that I didn't know about. And so it was really working with animals, being in nature, physical labor, that I need that. That's an important part of me. So piece by piece, I began to figure out what would help me till I got to a kind of a more stabilized place. So the depression was still there, but I could manage it. The physical stuff still there to a degree, but not nearly as bad. My health was stable. So then I got the job in the treatment world and started to understand this field, and then bang, 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 all kinds of new awareness and new tools came into being. But in those initial days, it was figured out as you go, and it's trial and error. So,
and you know, one of the ways that you really frustrate people today is by acknowledging that healing from complex trauma is a long process. It's one of the things that we appreciate your authenticity after you say it, but the first time you hear that this is a 2 to 10 year process, and it's not just like a snap and then you're going to be healed. And so, like, on your own journey, kind of how long were you in kind of this real like pit of despair and pain? And then from the point where you feel you really started your healing journey to maybe where you reached what you said here was like that stable, like at least a stable place. How long did that take?
That was about a 7-year dark time. And then my physical health stabilized, then that started to stabilize the emotional. But again, there was still a long way to go, but it was starting to stabilize. But yeah, that was a 7-year journey. And I think, so there's so many pieces to that, Andy, that like, to me, the whole Western culture medical model is very linear, quick, 3 easy steps, 12 weeks, you'll be fixed, you'll be better. And when it's a physical health issue, yeah, that's usually the case. But what do you do when it's an emotional trauma thing? Well, that medical model doesn't work. And so I had to experience the slowness of the process. I had to experience learning to be able to sit in some uncomfortable emotions that couldn't be easily resolved and be okay with that and know it wasn't going to kill me. I was going to learn from this and I was going to make it. I had to learn that for most people from complex trauma, pain has only been a negative thing. It's always resulted in more pain. But what I was beginning to realize, yeah, pain that you can't resolve is a terrible thing. But when you can actually begin resolving pain, pain can be a wonderful growth. You can learn some of your deepest, most important lessons in life that come out of pain. And so I was beginning to realize that the pain of my 7 years was pushing me to a level of thinking. It was pushing me to a level of self-awareness. It was pushing me to a wisdom I never would have had if life had stayed easy. It was forcing me to confront the paradoxes of life. It was forcing me to confront some really deep stuff. And it was like, yeah, I don't wish that on anybody, but I'm kind of glad I went through it because of what I've learned from it. And so in many ways it was hell on earth, but it was the crucible as well that was refining some stuff and creating something more beautiful.
How long did it take you? Because I do feel that one part of the healing journey is to be able to look back at the pain or the challenges, and at some point we have this reframing where it's, as you said, the crucible, where it's we've seen how it's grown us into who we are today, and that maybe we can find some level of like appreciation with it. Like how long were you into your own healing journey before you started to look at your past and kind of pull out the positive from that pain?
I think it was once I started in this field, so 21 years ago, and I began teaching workshops and counseling clients. And I was realizing that as they were sharing their trauma and their life issues, that what I was drawing on to teach them wasn't a book. It was what I had gone through, what I had learned from experience, what I had learned through those hard years. And I began to realize, okay, this gave me a whole reservoir of wisdom and knowledge that I can now help other people. And so that was, to me, a real important turning point. And then I think what came out of all of that, too, was just an openness to be vulnerable and authentic. And so when my kids started being honest with me about their struggles and what they were doing, and I was just able to be honest about where I was at and what I was doing, that helped them heal. That helped them realize, okay, I'm not being judged here. My dad's gone through similar stuff and he gets it and he's empathetic. And so to me, it wasn't just what I learned. It was the crucible also it can either harden you or it can make you more soft. It can make you more gentle, transparent, loving. And thankfully that was happening in me. I could have been more hard. I know that. That would have been very easy. But I think it was having kids that just kept me going, that I want to not just grow in knowledge from this experience, I want to grow in character.
Yeah, it sounds too that, you shared kind of when you were on the beginning of that path, there was greater and greater isolation. But then a big part of your coming out, your story, was this friend who checked in once a month, this authenticity with your family, but also your work as a counselor and working with other people, like sharing your own wisdom, but also kind of being with them and hearing about their pain as well.
Yeah, and I think what I realized, and this was a huge major shift for me, was um, I'd been this solo teenager, solo 20-year-old who did everything in his head, did everything by himself, and had been very successful doing that. What I began to realize now is when I truly connected with people, my depression lifted. When I truly connected with people, my symptoms improved. When I truly connected, there was a healing quality there. There was, and it was like, I can't be solo anymore. I have to learn how to connect and connect at a deep level with people consistently if I'm going to find healing and maintain stability. It's not just about routine I do all by myself that's going to keep me stable. It's got to have a connection, regular connection component. And it's not just superficial connection. It's got to be heartfelt, meaningful stuff. And so that, going from that being super independent solo person to being, no, I have to be a connected person, that was massive for me to gradually figure that out.
When you speak of connection, earlier I heard you say non-judgmental, vulnerable. Here you just mentioned heartfelt. So those to me sound like three really important components of connection. Are there other pieces? Like what are other components that really help with connection?
Yeah. So here's kind of what I've figured out in the last, this is just in the last few years as I've explored connection more and more. And it's like, to me, the whole field of attachment theory, attachment has just opened up this very important world in understanding how children develop, what makes a healthy child, what creates complex traumas when they don't get connection. And so it just, I've been learning and learning and learning over the last 10 years. But what I've realized in my own life in the last few years has been I need different types of connection and I need connection at different levels. So I'm a naturally very serious mindset. I just love serious thinking, serious conversations, being very serious in what I'm doing. But I need fun. I need laughter. I need to be able to just be silly once in a while. And that being able to connect with somebody at that, what feels like a more superficial, almost, how can that be meaningful? It is very meaningful in small doses. I need small doses of that and connecting at that very superficial level in order to stay balanced, in order to stay healthy. If I was to only connect with deep conversation, with sharing deep stuff, I'd become a very unhealthy person. I would just become a very lopsided, one-sided person. And so it's just realizing that I need lots of deep stuff, but I need light, fun, comedy, laughter as well. And I need people I can just be with, but not talk. But yet we still connect. We're doing something. We're together. We're going for a walk. We don't have to chat. We can, but so it's just realizing I have different types of connection. And then with one of my kids, I connect with them really well by doing similar music together. With another one, I connect by talking sports and sports related stuff together. And so it's realizing we all have kind of not just love languages, we have different connection languages. And I need to understand how to connect with other people based on what they're good at connecting at and what makes them feel alive when they connect. So I don't know if that answers your question, Andy, but it's just realizing I need various levels and types of connection to get a full connection. All of those, I need it with safe people. All of those, I need it with people who are not going to judge me or where I'm not sensing some hidden agenda, expectation, unrealistic standard that I have to somehow meet. I can just be myself. I can be authentic.
Yeah. So there's a lot of contours to connection.
Exactly.
Um, yeah. Yeah. I want to shift just a tad here. I was speaking with Nicole, who's one of the lift coaches and facilitators, and she'd told me how impactful your support has been in her own life. And she shared that you were her counselor, and that when she first went into recovery, she wasn't even enrolled in your React program. And so, but that she would attend your live Friday night talks and also Sunday church services, and but that you met her for free of charge. And this is the place that I'm gonna look at. Like, we talked a little bit about generosity last time, but how, like, I feel like generosity is a big part of your story, and kind of sharing and abundance. Like, how do you maintain that kind of that giving mindset and in a healthy way?
So let me come at it with a couple things here. One of the first things, so I was working in the drug addiction treatment world, but in the only treatment center that really saw addiction as a symptom of trauma. And so I was really working in addiction and trauma together. What I saw quickly was the reality with 90% of the clients that I worked with is they'd spend all their money on drugs and alcohol. So they were poor. They were mostly all on welfare, or they had jobs, but they're trying to pay off debts. And so it was, they needed counseling. They needed help, but they could not afford it. They couldn't go and pay 100, $200 an hour to a therapist. So it was just like, I'm getting a salary. I'm not relying on them to pay me to put food on the table, so I can do this for free, pro bono. But it was just realizing that sadly, in our society today, where most counseling you have to pay a fee, there's a segment of people in recovery that can't afford that fee. And so they're basically losing out unless somebody pays for them. And so it was just being sensitive to that. But I think the second thing that I saw was there's two parts to this. There's most people that I was dealing with that were coming out of complex trauma were coming out of quite toxic families, and that they weren't able to have relationships with. They had to set boundaries with. They were still being hurt by those families. And most had major daddy neglect, daddy issues, daddy abuse stuff. Most had no concept of a healthy family relationship or a healthy father relationship. And I just began to realize that people were beginning to sense that in me and looking at me as kind of a surrogate father. Now, I had to walk and figure out how to manage this, because what was happening in the world of counseling at that time is you do not develop a personal relationship with your clients. You keep a very clear boundary, professional boundary. But I was going, okay, I'm seeing these people also, they're coming to the Friday night thing that we're offering to the public. They're coming to church. So I'm building relationships with them outside of the counseling office. How do I blend that I'm their counselor, but yet I'm building these relationships and they look at me like a dad? And so I basically had to say, I'm not disregarding the counseling model totally, but I have to adjust it to fit the fact that they need healthy counselors. And so the boundaries aren't going to be about you set external rules for relationships where you set all these distances. I have to have good internal boundaries where I allow connection, but I'm not going to let that lead into anything unhealthy. And so it was really realizing boundaries are still needed. The counseling world has set external boundaries, but it doesn't work for people with complex trauma. They need relationships and connection. So I have to move the boundaries into my internal world and create good internal boundaries so that I'm a healthy father, I'm a healthy friend. And that was my journey so that I would remain totally ethical, totally above board, but I would allow connection. And so to me, what I began to realize is I was creating a community where people were feeling like this was their family. Their toxic biological family, it wasn't meeting their needs at all. It was hurting them. And so we still long for a family. We still long for that. And so they're not getting that in the counseling world. They're getting counseling, but they're not getting family and connection. We have to provide it somehow. And so it was, okay, this is kind of naturally beginning to happen. And I just need to kind of manage it to make sure it stays healthy.
I think that's like it's such a kind of a contrast to what you described on your own journey with like the psychologist of that just being so dispassionate. Like I can really see the distinction between isolation and connection, and how the system that we've had for a really long time continued to create and maintain isolation that just wouldn't help. And I think too with that family, it's just like being so powerful to have this external family, like a family of choice, rather than necessarily the family of origin. And you mentioned, with these internal, kind of holding these internal boundaries necessarily over like external boundaries. A lot of people come into complex trauma with histories of abuse, with histories of sexual trauma. Like, as a male leader, can you speak like how it is to hold space, especially for women, to ensure that they feel safe while they're sharing their deepest vulnerabilities and connecting with you?
Yeah. So again, just what I saw was so many women develop this excellent intuition radar as to whether men are safe. And what I was seeing in working with, so our facility was a co-ed facility, so guys and women were there. And all of a sudden I was seeing women open up to me, which was telling me they're sensing that I'm safe. Okay, so that was part one. But if a woman was crying, I would never touch her or hug her unless I said, would you feel okay if I gave you a hug? And I wouldn't do that every time, but once in a while I might do that. But I would ask permission. I would make it their choice. Or I would motion to another female to ask them if they could give them a hug. So it was just really realizing that a lot of things that I might naturally do with people who hadn't been traumatized, I couldn't naturally do now with deeply traumatized people, especially if there had been sexual trauma or abuse. I now had to kind of restrain myself from some of those impulses and not act on them, which felt cold and uncaring, but yet it was actually loving because it was providing safety and space for them. And then getting to the point where you gave them permission to, and the choice as to whether they receive that or not, and whether it was from a man or a woman. So it was just again, realizing that you're actually having to stop some natural healthy processes in order to keep these people safe or feeling safe. I remember very distinctly a woman who'd been severely traumatized sexually, physically by men, and a guy came up behind her and just tapped her on the shoulder, and she just lost it. And then his first thing, he could see she was upset. He went to put his hand on her arm to calm her. And that just sent her off even worse. And it was like, wow, like you just can't do what you normally would do until they begin to know that you're safe. And so it was just a gradual learning journey. But what a child, this is the sad piece to me. One of the greatest co-regulators to a child, one of the greatest grounding things to a child is physical touch. Being held, being rocked, being back rubbed, all of that, all non-sexual, but it's so beautiful. When that's been abused, you take away from the healing journey for a little while for people the very thing that was designed to be such a wonderful healing component. So you have to go to other tools to help them co-regulate, etc., before you can ever get to that one that was so badly abused. And that's just so sad, but it's the reality.
Yeah, yeah. And I hear there's like, what you're saying, it's that being much more conscious about consent, like the verbal consent, rather than just kind of a intuitive consent, but also offering things in a way that it's out of. You use the word cold. I'm going to flip that around on you and say it's in a way that it helps them with it's out of their own agency, where they're allowed to make a choice.
Exactly. I'm just saying that to me it felt cold.
Yeah, yeah. No, I understand.
When yeah. But to them it felt safe. That I wasn't going to try to push physical touch on them before they were ready for it.
Yeah. Could you maybe share, like, you've worked in this trauma world and in counseling for a really long time. Could you maybe share like a couple of maybe some of the more challenging stories or relationships that you've experienced in this world?
Yeah, I would say after years of doing this, you begin to kind of categorize in your mind the ones you have the greatest success with, the ones easiest to work with, and it gets harder and harder and harder and less success. So I think there's several in the hardest to work with, the least success would be the extreme narcissist psychopath. They have so much shame, so much fear, though they're trying to compensate and act like they have none and act like they're perfectly okay with themselves, but they will never move out of their comfort zone, never look at something they don't want to look at. They will never try anything different. And they will then, every time they feel a painful emotion, they will twist it to make it your fault. And you just can't reason with them. You can't present an accurate picture of the world with them. You can't dialogue properly with them to resolve stuff because they're just afraid they're going to get hurt again. And so it's ultra self-protective mode that comes out as narcissism, sociopath, psychopath stuff. So frustrating. So early on, I didn't understand that fully. I sensed some of it and acted kind of on my gut. But the more I understood it, the better I was able to spot it, the better I was able to set boundaries early with that and not get drawn into some of this stuff. So that was number one. Number two challenge to me was I've had probably extreme DID, dissociative identity disorder. So people who had actually split into multiple personalities. So you could be in a counseling session with them and all of a sudden they'd switch. And all of a sudden you're talking to somebody else with a different voice, with a different vocabulary. And then they switch again and then they don't remember what they were doing an hour earlier when they were talking to you. To me, there's been so much damage, so much trauma that they had to splinter off to try to protect the child. And so when that extreme form of self-protection has to kick in, you just know there's going to be a long, long, long road of healing to integrate parts back into a whole person again. And some just can't go there. It's just they got to walk through some really painful stuff to reintegrate and heal. And so there's just, yeah, it's so slow that it's discouraging. Some just aren't willing to do it. The ones that are, they, to me, become some of the most beautiful souls that I've worked with. They're just beautiful, amazing. But it's a different set of tools in counseling when you're working with kind of that DID, extreme DID stuff. I've had some, and I don't talk about this because to me, it's got to be qualified so many ways, but I've had a handful or even more of people I've worked with that come out of satanic ritual abuse. And that is just the extreme, most evil types of abuse possible that are inflicted on a child. And just working sometimes with them is so damaging. But there's a spiritual abuse that's part of that. There's an indoctrination and twisting of everything that messes with their brain so much, and they don't know lies from truth, that it's really challenging to work with that. Then I think the final one would be it's your borderline personality. They can be doing so good, but then they get triggered and they go into that limbic brain that gets very irrational, and they lash out and do all kinds of distorted reasoning and then damage. And they can be super challenging because they're so wonderful most of the time. It's just, it's in those moments when they're triggered that it's, whoa, what are we dealing with here? And it can just destroy the whole counseling relationship because all of a sudden you're terrible. They don't want anything to do with you anymore. I'm done. You're, etc. And it's like, wow, okay, what do I do with that? It's quite challenging. So you can't be in this field without a blend of wonderful, positive results in counseling, but also very difficult, frustrating, challenging experiences in counseling. You can't have the one without the other.
You've mentioned internal boundaries a lot. So when you're with somebody and they do go into this extremely dysregulated space, how do you protect yourself but continue to behave and act in a healthy way that can be healthy for both you and for the client?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I've seen is, I think in many times the natural response, if you look at the narcissist, if you look at the borderline personality, if you look at the DID, usually within their responses, when they're out of their comfort zone, they go into fight mode. They attack. And so the natural instinct often is return fire with fire. You're going to fight me, I'll fight you right back. Wrong move. But I don't want to go into flight mode. What I want to do is to go into what might look like freeze mode. I'm just buying time where I'm quiet. I'm not reacting. I'm not fight or flight. I'm just sitting there, giving them space to do a little bit of a vent. And then once they've done that, then I go, okay, I think that's enough for today, or I think that's not appropriate, and I'm not going to continue with this, whatever. But I need to be able to kind of address it at that point, not in fight mode, but in just very gently. We're going to end for today. I can see you're quite upset. We'll come back to this later, but I think that's all we can accomplish today. So you respond more in love mode, more in I want to be there for them, not to encourage unhealthy behaviors, but at least to see and acknowledge that they're in pain, to see and acknowledge the reality that we can't do much more in today's session if they're totally in their limbic brain or totally in self-defense mode. So let's just respectfully, lovingly draw this to a conclusion where I'm not trying to hurt them back becomes really an important piece.
Uh, I can see the value of that advice of like the kind of the freeze mode, just being in that calm. Because if you have an ounce of fight or an ounce of flight, it'll just be, you know, another handhold, another foothold for them
Yeah,
to
exactly.
grab on into their own fight mode. How what's going on inside you internally at the time? Is there a just a great sense of resiliency that you can stay out of that fight mode? Are you pausing and counting to 10? How do you, because what I see in many people is that it's like the trauma that when you hit that deep limbic response, it's like it's contagious.
Oh,
And
exactly.
especially when you're in a relationship. But how do
Yeah.
you,
I would say that I've noticed internally that it's slightly different with different people. So it's not the same every time is the
mm-hmm,
first thing I want to say. But secondly, I'm able to, so there's sometimes where I just kind of go into this quiet zone where this is their stuff. This isn't me. I know I'm safe. And I just naturally go there. But that's not always the case. Sometimes I notice that I can feel my own stress, anxiety building because I can see them dysregulating. And so it's okay. Yes, this potentially is contagious. So I need to ground myself. I need to regulate.
mm-hmm,
And so I need to breathe. I need to remind myself of some stuff that I can handle this. I'm in control here. I do have options here to take care of myself. So I need to go through a little bit of an internal coaching that just reminds me of some of that stuff. But then there's a part of my brain that's also formulating, okay, where am I going to go next? What am I going to say in response? What's going to be my next move once they're done? So your brain's working at different levels from listening, processing your own your own regulation,
mm-hmm,
and then where am I going to go next? So part of to me is often people when they're lashing out in pain, they just want their real fear and pain to be heard. So they can say all kinds of stuff that's really not the issue. They can accuse, they can blame, they can twist things to make everything else the issue. I want to hear what's really going on. What's the real issue driving this? Is it that they don't feel heard? Is it that they're afraid of something? Now, I may speak to it, I may not. It depends kind of what mental state they're in. But that's part of what I'm listening for is instead of just me going now into defensive posture, I want to stay in listening posture. I want to stay in truly hearing and getting them posture, not now defending and wanting them to get me posture. So again, all kinds of little internal things are going on is the bottom line.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I heard you say there's that kind of that like that internal relational boundary of this is something that's happening in them and you're aware that you're safe. And then also the grounding, regulation, but then staying in your cortex where you're formulating. So it
Yeah, and
sounds.
then sometimes part of what I'm processing is, okay, I know I haven't said anything wrong, misrepresented anything, done anything
Mm,
wrong.
mm-hmm,
So this isn't my fault in any way. I've actually presented a very gracious, accurate picture with some suggestions. This is all them. This something's being triggered. So
mm-hmm,
I don't need to take this on and feel guilty that I've done something wrong. I can just sit and wait and see kind of what's really going on with them. And if I'm able to do that, that's really an important step just to stay grounded.
And it was just something where, I know you've been a study of human nature for a long time. You've worked with people a lot. Uh, as you've grown throughout kind of your own coaching and counseling, how have you noticed from, maybe in the first years, like your responses, like how you'd respond to where you are now?
I think one of the big things is early. So a couple of things. Early on, I would hear a person would come in with a crisis, and so I had a big fight with my wife. We're on the rocks, our marriage, and she's always nagging me. She's always criticizing me, blah, blah, all those things. So I would get preoccupied with their crisis. I would get preoccupied with the details of what could we do to solve this. What I began to realize is that's a symptom of a bigger picture happening. That's a symptom of a deeper issues happening. So don't get drawn into the symptoms. Get focused on what's the bigger picture, what's going on below the surface that's feeding into these symptoms. So I think so much of counseling in the West has become just very much crisis fixing focus. Let's just get you tools to manage the crisis, and it's not dealing with the deeper issues that are feeding repeated crises. And so that was such a big piece for me, is to always go, what's the bigger picture here? What's going on below the surface? That I think was very important. The second thing I think to me was it's kind of a blend of bits of codependency that I had trained into me growing up and bits of impatience with a slow process. So it was wanting to get over involved in helping them instead of I'm going to support you and help you by teaching you, letting you process, listening to you, but you got to do the work from here on. And I got to take my hands off a little bit and let you kind of sink or swim on this one. And then this is going to take a lot longer than just trying this new tool as if that's going to magically fix you. That's probably one tool out of 100 that you're going to have to learn. And there's a whole bunch of nuances about how to use that tool that you're going to have to learn. And so it was just being patient with how long the process is. And that, because I think often in the beginning, your own self-esteem is based on how successful they are, how well they're doing. And if they're struggling and not doing very well, I guess I'm not a very good counselor. And it's realizing, no, I did really good counseling there. It's just a slow process. It doesn't say anything about my skill set. So, yeah, I think that's been two key things for me.
Yeah, that perspective and that emotional independence have got to be really huge. You mentioned earlier, you kind of brought it up with like when you were talking about DID, but can we look on the flip side of this? Like, so you've been doing this for a while. Could you maybe talk about, are there people that you've known for a while who you still have a relationship with or know about their life? What are some of the kind of like the more success stories that have come out of your clients?
Yeah, that to me is what's motivated me through the years. So what I've told people when I train people to work in this field is I know of no field that is more challenging but more rewarding than working in this field, because you get to watch people grow up before your eyes. You get to watch people heal, transform before your very eyes. It's just thrilling, extremely rewarding. And I've seen that right from the get-go. So some of the first things that I saw was people that all of a sudden were becoming better parents. They were becoming better spouses. So their relationships, their homes were getting healthier. And that was huge because that's such a high priority in most of our life is I want my kids to turn out. I want my kids to be happy. And so to see people heal to the point that they become better parents and better spouses was very rewarding. And then many would get their jobs back. We've got some that have been with us now for many years that now work for us, that are just really, they've grown to the point where they're able to help others very effectively. So, like, I don't want to get into all kinds of specific stories, but like I've watched some people come out of just horrendous backgrounds with tons and tons of trauma that now kind of have a motherly role, a fatherly role to other people in recovery. They've become just this wonderful mentor that encourages people, that makes time for them, holds space for them. And so they're not in an official capacity of this is their career they're getting paid for. They just serve by, these are my people. I've been there. I want to help them. And they just are so important within the recovery world to have those people. And so I've seen so many people like that. I've seen others that just, they begin to get to know their personality, get to know their skill set, their talents, and they go, wow, I think I maybe need to change careers. I think I've been following what my parents wanted or what I thought was going to make me happy. I think, and they all of a sudden are going back to school, exploring this whole new field and finding great fulfillment in it that they never had in their old career. And it's just like, wow, that's a scary, massive shift in life direction. But that's what is so beautiful to watch. So to me, that positive results can show itself in so many different ways, from home life to job life to career switch to service type of things to working in this field very effectively. Just one other thing to say on that, Andy. When I started in Canada at that time, in the addiction world, most of the people that worked in the addiction treatment world did not have a degree, they just had life experience. And that was considered, that's all the credentials you need. You got life experiences. We don't care about master's degrees, PhDs, anything like that. That started to change in the West. And so now more emphasis is put on degrees. And I see the value in that. But to me, that it's gone too far, because now it's just basically you just need this academic information. And what I try to do with Lift and our Compass program is we got to blend both. You need the knowledge, but you need the life experience. You can't effectively help people unless you've not just learned it, but you've lived it. You've worked through the tools and the experiences yourself. And so that's, to me, those are the most effective people. They may never have PhDs, but they're the most effective in this field, is when you blend knowledge and life experience.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of that, like kind of that intellectual, emotional, experiential divide. And what I hear you saying is that experiential like really matters. Not to let go of the intellectual, but that experiential is such an important part of this as well. And also too, what you were saying, I think that it's really beautiful, because how you can watch somebody's healing journey and how it can just kind of radiate or cascade out to family members, to children, to other people, that it's something that, like, one person's growth and journey can really lift so many other people.
I think it's as small as this. I remember so many times going in to teach a class, and people would say to me, "Did you have a video camera in my house? Because you just described me perfectly." And I go, "No, that's just years of experience." But they go, "But you put words to it in a way that I was able to see that behavior in a whole new light. And now I understand it. Now I know how to change it. Thank you." And it's just like the aha moments that they got are so rewarding to see, because that aha moment resulted in a change, growth, some healing, a new tool. And so to me, I get to watch people basically every day have aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a certain amount of reward just in that all by itself.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't, for my own journey, I can, when that light bulb turns on, instead of just continuing to fumble through the dark, it can just really changes your capacity for how you relate with yourself and how you relate with others and with the world. I really see, one of the themes that I'm really seeing coming out of today is it goes back to that a conversation we had on connection and these layers of connection, the types of connection, but also building the skills and understanding to see yourself, connect with yourself in another way, more securely, but then also learning how to relate with and having those tools, how to relate with other people as we.
Yeah. So if I can just add one other piece to this.
Mm-hmm.
In one sense, growing up, I was very connected to myself. I was very aware of my own thoughts and much of my emotional world. I was very aware of. What I didn't realize, though, is that there was a part of me that I wasn't connected to. So I thought because I'm very connected, I spend a lot of time in introspective thinking and processing, that, boy, I am so connected to myself. The reality was, in some ways, I was connecting only in those areas so I wouldn't have to connect in other areas. It was a bit of an escape from connecting to all of me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was to some emotional stuff, some wound stuff, some parts of me I didn't really like. And so it was a bit of a eye-opener for me to realize that I wasn't as connected to myself as I thought, and that I had to grow in becoming more connected with myself. And so what I realized was, as soon as I got to an area where I didn't want to connect to, if I couldn't escape back into the intellectual world, etc., I would just get busy. Because if I'm busy, I don't have to think. If I'm busy, I don't have to connect. So being present to myself, I thought I was good at, but I really wasn't as good as I thought. I was good in certain areas, but a lot of my busyness was actually avoiding connecting with myself. And so what I then began to realize was, okay, let's transpose that to other relationships. And I began to realize I'm really good at connecting with Kim and the kids in limited ways. Only when it suits me, only when it's around the intellectual, introspective, that I better, otherwise I'm terrible at connecting. I'm terrible at being present. So I got to expand my ability to connect beyond just the comfort zone that suits me. And I got to be able to connect in broader and broader ways with others. But it had to start with myself. And then it led to being able to connect with others at broader and broader ways. And I think that's still a learning process for me. That's going to go on for probably the rest of my life. But
Who would you be able to? I'm going to say I heard two big things there. One is kind of like there are these things that we do to escape, and then there's another of there are these like holes in our awareness.
right, blind spot.
Are they blind spots? Yeah. Is there some form of advice that you could give to people listening that might help them recognize kind of what their own escape pods are, or ways to find their own holes in awareness?
Yeah, and I've asked myself that question many, many times. And kind of what I've figured out is this. Two things have to come together to get rid of a blind spot. So I have to grow in a certain amount of knowledge or awareness, And then I have to be confronted with a situation where that awareness now explains that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody just was to say, you got a blind spot there, I might not even be able to see it, because I don't have enough knowledge base yet, and I haven't had the right circumstance expose that blind spot based on my knowledge base. And so to me, it's just a gradual process. You can't just sit down with a person and say, you got a blind spot here, you got a blind spot here,
Mm-hmm.
and expect
Mm-hmm.
it's going to fix it. We just don't work that way. It's just a gradual process that combines life experience with growing self-awareness that gradually exposes our blind spots. That's why for me, ongoing reading, listening to other people teach is such an important part of my ongoing growth, because that leads to greater awareness, greater self-awareness, which then helps expose blind spots in experiences. And so that for me, it's just for people to keep somehow built into their life daily routine 15 minutes of reading, half hour of reading that just continues to keep you learning, because everything is kind of flows out of that.
Kind of keeping this continuous process of learning and just having that an open mind as well. Well, let me ask Tim, is there anything else, maybe something that I might have missed or that we haven't covered? Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
So just final thoughts. Two things really come together, and it's around this connection thing.
Mm-hmm.
So Bruce Perry, who wrote with Oprah Winfrey the book What's Wrong with You, which to me is just a wonderful book for people to read to really understand trauma and its effect. But he tells the story of going to New Zealand, and he was asked to be part of this big medical conference. And so the indigenous New Zealand people were there, and they just said something that just impacted him, and then he shared it and impacted me. But it was, in the West, you guys have got everything itemized, that if you got these symptoms, then it's this disease, and then you give them this medicine and this treatment, and you've got a wonderful system all worked out of diagnoses and symptoms and kind of all of that stuff. But you're missing the most important part of healing, and that is connection. And so that resonated with me initially, and just like, something's very true there. I don't fully understand it yet, but we need connection. So then when I began to understand the vagus nerve and the whole parasympathetic nervous system, what I began to realize was the body naturally heals itself when it's in the parasympathetic nervous system. And that only happens when the vagus nerve sense I'm in safety and I'm connected to safe people. And then I go, okay, that explains why people in trauma recovery need safety and connection, because it puts their whole nervous system into a healing place. And it meets the deepest needs of life that weren't met as a child. And so it's, for a person coming up complex trauma, to enter connection is scary, because I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt again. If I'm authentic, if I open up to people, if I let somebody in and connect with them, something bad's going to happen. And it's just, to heal, I got to actually walk through some fear that gets triggered by taking steps to healing. And one of the fears is I'm going to get hurt if I open up and connect. And so it's just, if you can get through that, then you begin to experience the benefits of that connection and safety. So,
Well, Tim, it's been such a privilege to be able to connect with you again during this conversation. And so thank you so much for sharing your insights, your deeply learned wisdom, and also your generosity of your knowledge and who you are. This has been a really inspiring conversation, and thanks Tim, and I'm looking forward to more in the future.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you for joining us on the Time with Tim podcast. If you'd like to share your own experiences or have questions, feel free to email us at podcasts@timfletcher.ca. Want to learn more about complex trauma? Subscribe to Tim Fletcher's YouTube channel for past lectures and his Friday night Tim Talks. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Looking for more support? We offer programs and courses to help with healing complex trauma and recovering from addictions. Visit timfletcher.ca to learn more or send us an inquiry. We're here to support you. Until we meet again, take care, and thank you for letting us be a part of your healing journey.